So we are a little bit stuck. I'm a little bit stuck because I sort of explained one class that I wanted to explain about how Aristotle's concepts come together to make his soul. There's a lot of more things that we need to explain, and basically continuing in his book and in general the concepts, but I don't know them. I don't know them well enough to tell you. In other words, the things that we still need to get on, I'll give you sort of a map. And this is the map for on the soul. He started off with like what we call the most general definition of the soul, or we could call it the form of the soul. In other words, what kind of thing a soul is. And then when he still wants to give some kind of proof of that. The proof is really, in other words, you can, in one way that people understand it, is going through the other four causes of the soul. So what I give you until now is the form of the soul, it's the form of the body, but what kind of thing the soul is, that's what it is. Then we need to give you like what is the soul doing, or the efficient cause, what gives us the soul, what the doing of it is. And then we need to do the material cause, which would be the body or something like that. And also other things, other questions that he started off the book with. One of the big questions were, if you look in chapter 1 and book 1, you'll see the questions that he's worried about is, does the soul have parts, for example? One thing that, my reference to all these things is because you meet them in Hebrew books written in Hebrew, otherwise known as Sefer Machshava and Chassidus and Kabbalah, but they're just philosophy books written in Hebrew. And you find people talking a lot about this second thing, for example, the thing, well, first what the soul is a very important thing. We'll get to that in a minute, why that is important. Then the thing of parts of the soul seems to them very interestingly important. It probably has implications for theological or ethical or other theories. But for example, if you've read Rambam and Shemona Prakim, the first thing he wants to say is that there's only one soul with different powers and not different souls. And people are very confused about what that means. I'm not sure myself what exactly he's referring to. But that was a question that was asked. This is basically just Aristotle's position versus Plato, more or less, what he's saying there. But if he means something more, I'm not sure. So that was a thing. Like some people, Plato had this story of 3 souls, and then Aristotle didn't like that. He said, well, that's not true. There's only one soul, but it has 3 powers, and sometimes they're separable in some ways. This whole shtickle Torah is one. There's a whole big question that he wants to know. Really what this question is if one of the questions is if different things that have souls, like animals and humans and others, if they're synonymous, right? If it means the same thing, if they're a different kind of thing. And therefore, if the parts, since humans seem to also have animal souls, or they're also animals, so then are humans 2 things, like the Tanya says, or they're one thing, like the Rambam says, or like Plato and Aristotle? More or less, there's readings of Aristotle, but Aristotle definitely thinks that it's one thing. So this question, I saw people. This is one of the weird things where you read these commentaries on the Rambam, even modern professor kind of people, and they all like say, well, yeah, the Rambam took it from Alter Rabbi, from Avicenna, and they said this. Well, no. I mean, yeah, he might have immediately took it from there, but it really goes back much further, these debates, and it's useful to go back further because you get the whys of them, right? You're like, oh, so he's Avicenna, okay, so therefore, what am I going to do about it? That's one thing. Then there's the thing of actually, then what he does in the rest of the book sort of is actually going through, so this is like the more general discussions. Then in the actual book, he goes through, well, there's another very general discussions which sort of, I get answered by if we would understand all of this, but I don't understand all of this, which is, and if you read the beginning of On the Soul, Aristotle says we need to know what connection the soul has with its affections or with its actions. So in other words, the things that the soul does and the things that are done to the soul, right? What we call affection is really being affected, right? Affection becomes in English and other language a word for emotions, which again mean being affected by, right? Emotion being moved in English, say being moved, and being moved in Aristotle is literal, being affected by, being moved by something. And there's a big question of how that relates to the soul, or does that relate to the body, or does it happen to the soul, and so on. And then after all of that, we could go through, he sort of goes through all the things that the soul is, because definitely for him and for everyone, it's things that the soul does. Maybe for him it's what the soul is, if you figure out exactly what these 2 things mean, which is live, right? And there's all kind of things which living includes, right? Mostly moving, and growing, and feeling, sensing, really, sensing. And nutrients is what I meant by growing, right? Taking the nutrients and growing, and sensing, and thinking. And sort of the book goes up this ladder, more or less. It is moving is in the wrong place, but mostly it goes up this ladder. And the important thing, this is in general important, that you sort of get in this book Aristotle's theory of sensation and of intellect, of thinking and of feeling, sensing, which is like a philosophical discussion in its own right. People don't connect it always to this discussion, but for him it's like the soul is what senses, perceives in the sensory way. So we need to understand perceiving, right? And there's 5 senses, and each one gets a whole treatment, how they work. So the 5 senses are a big part of the discussion of the soul. And then going up from that is thinking, which to him is a kind of sense, remember. We sense things in the world and we think things in the world. It's not something that just happens in our brain and is self-referential or something like that. Now the important thing is, and going back to the important theological thing that happens there, and this is another thing that if I would have time to do, there has to be like a whole course just on this last thing. Each of these things is a whole course. We just did a whole course on like one chapter, but each of these, the last thing has to be a very big course, because very famously Aristotle in the end of the book, well, sort of at the end, because there's some things after that, but in part 3, chapter 5 or so, he discusses what is known as the active intellect, which basically means that all of senses are just being acted on, and then he starts to think if there is a part of the human soul which is, he calls it over there active, when nobody knows why it's called active, or it's not so simple to know. But in any case, in connecting to the rest of the discussion of the book, this is the thing that Aristotle says can be separated from the soul. So this is where Plato was right in the Phaedo and so on, that the soul is eternal and doesn't die when the body dies and so on. And this became a very big discussion how to explain it. He didn't really explain it in this book. And very famously, so like the Picarsis you're reading, the reductionist reading, is it hot here? I can close that and open the window if you're hot. Because I'm hot. You're not? Okay. No, you don't have to.
No, I'm a little warm.
Yeah, so you could close the thing. It just makes it too hot, you know. You probably know this term. Just there's like, you could sort of say that this is just a part of the human soul, like one of the things that the soul does, and therefore, well, Aristotle explicitly says that it's separable. So how exactly is another question. But that's one thing. So there's like one discussion to what extent, and there's different readings of this, to what extent Aristotle does have something worthy of the name soul for religions, for example, who are very interested in having a soul that is in Aristotelian terms at least fully separable from the body, so can survive death. Aristotle does have something, and it's not clear what he means. Like, he might just be playing, he's also working with a tradition that has such a concept.
Which is
Plato, maybe even before Plato, but Plato definitely discussed, Socrates in Plato in his many dialogues discussed how the soul doesn't die. And sometimes, in the Apology, Socrates says, I don't know, maybe yes, maybe not, doesn't make a difference. In any case, we shouldn't be afraid of death, right? But in the Phaedo, very explicitly argues that the soul is eternal and immortal. And in other dialogues, in the Phaedrus and other places, more explicitly even. So he does have this tradition, and there might be such a Greek tradition even before, but it's definitely in Plato. And Aristotle's referring to this. Problem is that his theory of the soul, and maybe we'll get someone to tell us Plato's theory next week, but his theory of the soul allows for that very clearly. He has a separate soul. All of his souls are separate from the body. Plato's souls, meaning they don't. Separate mean can exist without. That's just a word for that. And therefore, even the slower souls for Plato are eternal, probably, or could be eternal at least. Meaning the appetitive soul.
Organic bodies.
Yeah, not exactly. It might be that, it might not be that, but all of his forms are separable anyways. That's another way of saying.
Eternal means it pre-exists the body too.
It might pre-exist too, yes. It also pre-exists the body, possibly, which is another, yeah. Plato talks, at least in his myths, about transmigration of souls, about Gilgulim, and it has this whole story of the souls following the stars and then coming down, all kind of nice myths, which he himself calls myths. I'm not the one that calls them myths, but the question is what the nimshal is. Plato's forms are all separate, so that's not a problem. So this sort of goes back to the discussion of forms.
That's what I was asking.
I'm not sure if the souls are all the forms of the body. That's because it doesn't entirely see. It doesn't. Plato doesn't say the soul is the form of the body. That's Aristotle's shtickle. Plato says the soul is the mover of the body, like the captain moves the ship, and just like the captain doesn't need a ship to exist, so that's Plato's metaphor. And if you read Aristotle in the end of this chapter that we read, literally says we still need to find out if that's true. He keeps on thinking of this metaphor, and he really thinks that that's wrong. He doesn't think that moving, I don't know how to say this correctly, but he doesn't think that the correct definition of the soul is the mover of the body. He thinks that it might be the mover, but in a different sense, whatever. Gets it, that it's the form of the body, and that's why it probably dies when the body dies. The only way that we can have a soul that doesn't die is to have it not to be the form of the body to begin with. And that can be for the intellect. And now, that's one thing. And it's one shalif. To what extent this is serious and to what extent this works, even according to Aristotle himself, because he seems to make the soul contingent on the body, at least in some ways. And then he always has the intellect is different. He keeps on making an exception for the intellect, for an intellectual soul, so to speak. And the question is what that exception actually means according to him. He never says, okay, and this is going to heaven. Like that part he doesn't add, at least not on the soul, maybe in some other place. There are some other except from Aristotle, which say that, or at least ascribe to him and things, but on the soul doesn't say that. Now the next step of this story was that Alexander of Aphrodisias was the first one to say that the active intellect that Aristotle is talking about is not referring to a faculty of the human soul at all. It's a thing in the heavens. It's a separate intellect, entirely separate from humans. Well, it has some relation with it causes human intellection, but it's not a human thing at all. And that pshat went down through Al-Farabi and the whole Arabic tradition, and they all then had this whole thing with the active intellect, and then Al-Farabi especially connected this with Aristotle's movement intellects, which Aristotle never does. And Aristotle never has the list of intellects the way he does. And Rambam quotes this all in the second part of the guide and explains how Aristotle famously said that the heavens need to have a mover, and those movers are separate intellects. That's what it says in the Metaphysics. And Aristotle said, how many of them are there? Well, there must be... No, he never said 10. There must be as many as there are spheres. And he said there are 54 spheres, so there's 54. Or 53, or 54, or 52, depending on which Gersi you read. Something about 50.
At one point there might be 4, depending on which one's on top.
Yeah, there might be the Rambam says there's 4. No, Aristotle said there's 54, or 53, or something like that. Okay, and then the next chapter, Aristotle says, well, this doesn't make any sense, because there should only be one God, because he gets to monotheism somehow. He says some very weird argument, which is like Homer said, or someone, the rule of the many isn't good, so we need to have only one person to rule. Then basically Aristotle gets to monotheism by hating democracy. And you could find this argument in Philo and many ancient sources. They say democracy is obviously stupid, so obviously the world wouldn't run that way. And it's whatever, that's what they say. And therefore there must be one. So now, is there one active intellect or 54, one separate intellect or 54? Is mamash stira and two shtik? Like Aristotle, he doesn't ever reconcile the stira, just has these two things. There's one has sort of a different job, because he's the one that needs to cause all the movements, and the question is if these movements have any relation to each other. Anyways, Al-Farabi is I think the first one that says this explicitly. Maybe there's some people before him. There's also Plotinus in the middle with the whole Arabic Plotinus, which was ascribed to Aristotle fakely, and people confused. It's known as the theology of Aristotle. Anyways, so there's a whole mishmash in between. But the Neoplatonic tradition, and Al-Farabi is the one that most explicitly connected this with Aristotle, but maybe it might be before. Plotinus might have done something similar. They said that obviously, Al-Farabi is the one that obviously said this. I'm giving you a very general story that I learned from my friend mostly, and from other things. And he said that this 54 number is wrong, the Rambam quotes something like this. It's just wrong. Aristotle didn't have the correct number of the spheres. He just didn't know astronomy. And this is true because it was famously the whole thing with Ptolemaic astronomy versus Aristotelian astronomy. Aristotle's astronomy was considered wrong in the medieval times by everyone. There was a big kasha. The Rambam makes a whole deal about this, but everyone understood it to be wrong. So they said, well, no, nicht gefährlich. Astronomy wasn't developed in his days. So therefore they said the real answer is that there's 9 spheres. And we only need 9 spheres to explain all the movements of the heavens. And therefore there are 9 intellects. Well, if they're 9 or 10 or 11, this weird question gets very confusing. But in any case, Al-Farabi and these people, they decided that there's only 9 spheres, meaning 7 plus 8. So how do we go to 9? Trying to remember. No, there's only 8 spheres. There's 7 spheres for the 7 moving stars. Each one has its own sphere. And then the 8th one for the diurnal, for the everything else, which causes the daily revolution. And they understood that, right? Because that's the backwards world. So therefore, there's only one more. So that's 8 spheres. That's why if you hear
the moon and stars are all in the same sphere.
No, the moon and the sun and Venus and Mercury and Jupiter, whatever, they all have their own sphere. Turns around the world. And the world itself, not the world itself. Then outside of them, there's all the one of the fixed stars sphere, which moves once a day, everything. And that's why there's once a day we have a revolution, and then all these have their own. And it's relative to each other. Everything Matt worked with this system, more or less. I don't know the astronomy very well, but that's the very basic outline of it. So there's 8 spheres. Turns out only to be 8 spheres. Now, the 9th one, so we have 8 intellects. The 9th one, that one beyond all of that might be, so then we have, I'm trying to remember how we got to 10. Something like, I don't remember if there was one more, if there was, that was different machlokes, but I'm trying to remember, no. What does it say in the thing? Confused. He says the story here. You could read it. Here. The Rambam wants to get the 4. I remember that thing, but yeah, but that's because he doesn't. Okay, I'm not going to give that story right now.
There's a bunch of 4 things that are 4.
So the Rambam has one more sphere beyond all of this to turn everything for some reason. I'm not sure why. Maybe he separates this fixed stars from the daily revolution or something like that. So we end up the 9 spheres. Each one of them has this intellect. I don't remember why he has one more beyond everything. Okay, but anyways, there's 9, and then that's 9 intellects. Okay, now very importantly, one big addition that Al-Farabi did, or whoever it was did to the Aristotle system, is that he subordinated these intellects to each other. So he put them into a straight line. In other words, in a straight causal line. He said that's not true. Aristotle was just like, well, everything has to move and something has to move it, so there must be a separate intellect moving it. But he said it also doesn't make sense, because this has to do with monotheism, but there's arguments for this also. They can't just be randomly moving each other, because then something needs to coordinate all of them. That's the basic thing. They don't only move each by its own and just happens to be that they're all working out. There's something that makes them all work out. So sort of the answer, or one of the answers, the way the system they end up with was that there is God. There was a machlokes if God is the first active intellect or is one thing beyond the first active intellect. That was a machlokes between 2 goyim. Okay, Avicenna and Ibn Sina and Ibn Rushd were arguing about this. And the Rambam quotes both and sometimes says one and sometimes the other. It never tells us the true answer. But that's a different machlokes. But in any case, they had God causing or being the first intellect, and then that giving birth or causing or emanating, like in the Platonic system. The next one, and that giving birth to the next one. So each gives birth both to an intellect and to the sphere, which it's responsible for. And then the 9th intellect is responsible for, doesn't give birth to another sphere, but gives birth to everything else, to everything under the moon, which is not a sphere, so it's not as alive and it's not a God, but then gives birth to another intellect called the 10th intellect. And that 10th intellect has a job of giving knowledge and forms to everything under the moon. So both human knowledge and the forms of everything that exist here are caused by the 9th, or illuminated, however you want to call it, by the 10th intellect, known as the active intellect. So that was the story, and this is the human soul, or this is okay. Now, how does this exactly relate to the human soul? This is more or less what the human soul is when it is actualized. This was the more or less story that Al-Farabi gave. The human soul, in other words, human soul, the highest part of it, right? Knowledge. Human knowledge is only a potential for knowledge, and that's all that ever is really human. When it acquires knowledge, called the sechel hanikna in Hebrew, acquired knowledge, that it's the same as the active intellect. Because if you think about it, as Aristotle explained, knowledge is knowledge of forms. When I know something, when I know the world, what I know is its form, and that form, as Rambam explains in Perek Samaches, and is the same thing as what I'm knowing, as the knowledge and the know are the same thing. There isn't one person that knows something else, because what is the knowledge? If you think of the knowledge, it's just the form, and the form is only mine if you could separate the potential from the actual.
Get inside of it.
And it doesn't have to get it. Well, that's knowledge. Knowledge is this trick that it gets inside, because it doesn't get inside. It's not inside. It's the same thing. He thinks the same thing for sensation also, by the way, Aristotle. It's not only knowledge, it's like this. But whatever, I can't explain this. But this is I'm just giving you a mass.
Now does it act on? You're saying it doesn't act on?
No, it doesn't act on. It only acts on, only in the center. Rambam explains this in Perek Samchet, only in the center of its potential. When we don't know something, then there is someone that's not going to know. But once I do know something, it's not me that knows anymore. It's just knowledge knowing itself. And Rambam literally says that this is true for human intellect as it is for God. If you probably heard, there's a Tillian formula, knowledge knowing himself. Rambam says, and he's the only one that says this explicitly, but Rambam says that's true for human intellect actualized too. The only reason we ascribe this to God is because God has no potential, so God is always actualized intellect. But when human intellect is actualized, it's also the same as the thing known. Because it's just the form of the thing. And therefore, at least knowing everything on this world, and maybe even more, is just the 10th intellect, 10th separate intellect, known as the active intellect. So when you know, you become that intellect. And that's called prophecy and all kind of nice things.
I completely...
This is the Kabbalah, okay?
If you maybe explain one more time, you got this idea of
Which idea? No, how knowing is that? No, I have to give another whole series of shirim to explain it.
No, I didn't understand
Knowledge is a kind of sensation. But every sensation is a kind of potential being actualized. In other words, Aristotle says this: when you see something, how do I see something? This is a riddle. Okay, how do you see something? There's different ways of explaining it. And his way of explaining it is that something goes into you. Now that something obviously doesn't go into you. That its matter doesn't go in, but its form does. And in other words, you become that form. How do you become that form? Because you had potential to be that form. So therefore Aristotle, for example, in talking about seeing, famously says that your eye is potentially red and then becomes red when it sees something red. And there's a machlokes if literally thinks that something in your eye turns red. But that's what he says.
But it turning red,
he says that
correspond to it.
It doesn't correspond to anything. It's the same redness. It's the form of redness. It's the same. It's not. There's no correspondence theory.
I have brown in my eye.
Exactly. So the Aristotle literally has this question: why don't we always see everything? And the answer is because they need something to actualize the potential.
Okay.
His theory of sensation is not a theory of representation. There's no representation ever. Representation is not a thing that he heard of in his life. What?
And the soul doesn't actualize. Let's say now, my eye colors.
Yeah, when you see, whatever you see is an actualization of your eye. And that's what seeing is. Caused by the light or whatever it is that causes sight. Or
the form moving into the eye.
You could say it like that, but it's the form of your eye also. The form of your eye and the form of the thing become the same thing. There's only one form anyways, if you remember. Forms are always one. And the thing that separates them, generally, in most people, is the matter. There's only one form. Even for Aristotle, this is more complicated, but that's the general gist of the thing. So knowing is being. That's why ili data is literally, as in the sense of the form, not in the sense of the matter, but in the sense of the form. Just like seeing is being, and knowing is also being. But this is another whole sheet. I have to argue with all the modern conceptions of knowledge that are all exist to contradict this idea, and every single step of the way is a different way of thinking than we're used to, so I can't explain this. But what I want to explain was the kasmal. I didn't want to explain that. I just want to explain, and I told you that this is I'm just giving you a map for a whole different course. And anyways, the story was that these tzaddikim, Al-Farabi, they connected all these stories together. So the soul story of the active intellect with the metaphysics story of separate intellects, with putting that all together into this emanation system, turns out that actualizing the human soul is becoming the 10th intellect. And that is the human perfection. And that's what Rambam calls prophecy explicitly in Perish Mishnayos, not ever in any other place, very weirdly. But Al-Farabi definitely calls this prophecy. And Shain. Okay? That's
when you know something is prophecy, or when you certain type of
well, every time you know something, it's sort of prophecy, yeah. Even when you dream something, it's sort of prophecy. But really knowing everything, well, you don't know anything anyway, so you're not like, this is not a big kasha. Anytime you know something, that's prophecy, yeah. But knowing is like a very big madraga. Like 5 people in the history of the universe ever knew anything. And that's why there are only some few prophets. But that's a whole other story. But this is how everything comes together in this like little, all based on like 3 lines in Aristotle. And it all comes together from that little shtickle. And then Kabbalah is basically a version of this, because they also have their 10 intellects or 10 spheres, which they try to abstract even more and add even more Platonism to the mix. And also ends up that knowing things is connecting to the Malchus, which is another word for the 10th intellect. This is explicit in the early Kabbalah and Shain. Anyways, but you see the same, very similar system. And this is why people say that Rambam was a Mekibel. He actually was. I don't know why anyone thinks that he was not.
In what sense?
And if you read the Sfeidah Sari, you see, he has God with 10 Malachim, he calls them Malachim, but they're not Malachim as in Chazal, they're Malachim as closer to Spheres than Malachim, they're separate intellects. Eternal, well, they're caused, so they're not eternal, but they're eternal in the future direction. Eternal godly things. And he says that Nevuah is about focusing on these things. And he says in Perek Zayin, and he said that in other words, focusing on the forms. Well, yeah, this version of the forms. And then you not only focus on them, but you actually ascend through them, sort of, to the extent that it's possible. And that's also what Adam Haba is, right? Okay. Anyways, this is the general story. So, but really understand this and the whole story of how we get to this, and to even make it make any sense. That's a whole year of work, maybe more. I don't know. So that's the main stories going on here. Kitzur Hamasa is, but I'm not up to any of this. That's what I wanted to say. You should have this idea in your head, but I'm not up to any of this.
Which part of the idea should we have?
I don't. This is ganze Masse. There's 10 spheres, 10 malachim. If you read the first, you should read the first 4 prakim of Yesod HaTorah, and it says all of this openly. It's amazing how open the Rambam wrote so many things in his open book, and nowadays people read it and have no idea what's going on. And now, what I did want to talk about a little, and I did start a little bit, is now if we go back a little bit. So what I thought to do today, but I'm really flew in the whole thing. What I wanted to do today was sort of move back from the philosophy of it and a little bit back into the Yiddish sources, which is Rambam. Then we could do other sources, and see if we understand any Rambam now that we know a little bit of things. Now there's another whole story which we have to learn about, which is that, and interestingly, I'm going to make this comment, and I've seen others make this comment. Rambam never discussed the soul clearly, in any of his books. Never. Definitely never put together the whole picture.
Organic body that
Never says this. He says this once, but he never puts together this whole picture. In other words, this book in the Aristotle system also, and definitely in the sort of religious systems that based on this, the story of the soul is like the linchpin of the whole system. If this falls apart, everything else falls apart. Because this is what puts together cosmology, God, and humans, human knowledge, human perfection, which is everything humans should do in this world, prophecy, and what's, how do you call it, the how do we call it, Asheras HaNefesh, right? The existence of the soul, the punishment and reward. This all comes together in this question. So this question is really, we start with the question of God's existence, which is one question. Everything else, if you like to look at Yidgul Mikra, for example, has four about God's existence, might not be so related to the soul. It is also related to the soul, by the way. I'll give you in a minute why. But in general, everything else depends on what the soul is. Everything else. Because if everyone knows that Yidgul Mikra, for example, and this is the Rambam's formulation, but the Ikram formulated is God and Torah and Schar V'Einish. It's sort of the three categories that the Rambam's fit into also. And I told you, let's leave God alone, but Torah, everything is related to the soul because Torah is just prophecy. in other words, to philosophically understand or to theoretically understand what Torah is, you need to understand what prophecy is, because that's what it's about. That's why, like, the sixth decade, which is prophecy, is like sort of the principle of all the other ones until number 9 or so. And that's how it's explained in the guide also. In Meir Nevachim Chelek Beis, that there's Nevuah, but Tamei Mitzvahs and Chelek Shlishi, but that's the most important part. It's probably the biggest secret also of the Meir, and secret in the religious sense, because it's. And then this religious people hate it the most. What he thinks about prophecy.
What part?
I'm not going to tell you. People hate it. Why should I tell them? Naturalization of prophecy. Yeah. This is the only. In other words, like the Rabbanel said, the only thing Jews really believe is Torah and Hashemayim. Everything else is optional. In other words, it's whatever it says in the Torah. If you ask a normal Jew, tell you what do we believe, whatever it says in the Torah. It might say that there's a God, so we know that there's a God, like Shet in Rambam. It might say that it's Chav Einer, that's the Brisk Pshat. It might say that it's Chav Einer because whatever, but everything starts from there. And of course, philosophically, it doesn't really work that way, but it's still true that whatever your understanding of prophecy is going to be, that's going to change everything else. Nowadays, people sort of close that off. Even the most, I think this is the most radical thing. Al-Farabi said it. It's the most radical thing that was ever said in religious philosophy, this pshat of prophecy. And nobody really believes. I mean, people really believe it, but in an apologetic way. Like, we could make a pshat of prophecy also. But to really believe it would change everything. Like most people nowadays, like religious thinkers, sort of bracket prophecy. Besides for like the LSDs, right? The Latter-day Saints, LDS. Yeah, same idea. Besides for them, everyone else, and like a few weird American cults, which is the most weird place. But besides for them, everyone brackets prophecy. Like we have a revealed text, we don't have prophecy. Very different kind of story. And there's this text which obligates us and so on. And there's a whole tradition of interpreting it and everything, but that's nothing to do with what prophecy is. If you go back to all the way, like there's different levels, like I always say, this is already in Yiddishkeit, right? There's different levels of being a fundamentalist or being a reversionist, right? Like you could be whatever my mother told me. Okay, you'd be a little smarty, you go back to your Zayed. A little smarty like the Achronim, like whatever the Chaim Briska said. If you're a little smarty, you go back to whatever the Baal Shem Tov said or whoever the Vilna Gaon said. If you're a little smarty, you go back to the Shonim. I don't know if this is smart, but I'm just saying like the versions.
Everybody goes to some.
Or you could be like a Gronik and like a real Gronik and go back to the Gemara. Or you could be like some other I don't know who go back to the Mishnah. I'm not sure there was such a movement, but there should be. Would be the best one. I'm part of that one. Or there is such a movement.
Yeah, there is
it's like a Tzionish movement.
Yeah.
Because Torah says Yisrael. No, going back to Lowy is a Chalonish Tzionim. Who wrote about this? Amnon Karkovsky wrote a book about this. You know Amnon Karkovsky? I've been by one of his classes once. I have a friend who's this town. Anyways, he said he wrote a book. So Torah Yisrael is Mishnah, not Mikra. Mikra is Torah's bias Rishon. Nobody wants that.
They go to Talmud Yerushalmi also, not only Mishnah. Yerushalmi is also good.
Yeah, but also because it's a better Perish than the Mishnah. Right. So the Mishnah is the thing that's correct. So there's some Torahs that still people that want to go back to the Mishnah, and Karkovsky claims that the Harizal wanted to go back to the Mishnah, and the Beis Yosef. And the Beis Yosef actually wanted to make halacha back into Mishnah, and he calls it the Perish Shech Norach Mishnayos in his Magid Meshurim.
Yeah, but that's the Rambam also.
Yeah, sort of. Yeah, but he didn't want to go back to the Mishnah. He wanted it's different. He wasn't connected. The Rambam wasn't connected to Tanoim. He didn't like go to Kivret Tanoim and like the Harizal did. It's a whole different mahalach. The Rambam wanted to be a Tana, and for different reasons. Okay, he didn't want to be a Tana in that sense. Maybe yes, actually, I don't know. But then there's secular Zionism and some of religious Zionism, not religious, like Noach Vot, which I want to go back to the Bible. And then this is like the highest level you could be. Highest level, lowest level, I don't know. The most Lutheran you could be. But that's going to Shvet. Why would Martin Luther go back to the text of the Bible? Who cares about the text? You got to go back at least one step before that, which is the guy that, like the Rebbe said, where the Bible knows it from, right? It's like where the Rishalmi knows it from, but where the Bible knows it from, that's another whole thing. And that's where the Rambam wants to go back. Rav Kook talks about this, right? The returning of prophecy. And I don't know what he thinks it means, but at least to have a theory of that is where you really change everything. Right? Okay. I'm just explaining you why it's the biggest secret. Because that's where you get permission to change everything. Of course, the Rambam ruined us because he said that there's halacha, there's machlefes. Okay, well,
He undermines
that doesn't help too much. He doesn't. But I have a pshat on that Rambam. Just to be clear, I have a pshat on that Rambam. It's not true. The Rambam, in that halacha is the Rambam trying to go beyond the Torah. It's not faket in the Olam, but I'm not going to give this shir now. But the point is, it's not the pshat of the Rambam, and it's clear in the second chelik and where he talks about prophecy. That's not what it means. But in any case, that's also a very illogical formulation, because we could go back on that also. I never understood this. Since I was a little boy, I didn't get this whole thing. And steht in halacha that halacha then so. It's like my Rebbe told me that he has Gilei Lowy because a guy that has Gilei Lowy doesn't lie. It's circular reasoning, right? Very basic instance of circular reasoning. You can't have like the Rambam paskins that you have to pass like the Rambam. Thank you very much. I know that he paskins that.
How could the Torah paskin which part?
Yeah, exactly. If I'm a prophet, that means God is beyond the Torah. Everyone agrees to that. I mean, no, not everyone, but everyone theoretically agrees to that. The only shal is what God said. In any case, you can't have a Torah that says the fact that this Torah says that it's the only one is not very useful. Extremely unuseful. It might be true. I'm not saying that it's not true, but it's just a circular argument. It doesn't say anything. You've got that. Okay, I'm sorry for ruining your.
No, I'm saying it is if you're working within.
Yeah, thank you very much. But I'm not working within. I'm not working.
Within.
If you're working within, then you're not by my step. I'm going one step, working from where the Torah got it from. The Bible got it from. He got it from God.
I don't think it's ever talking to people outside.
I'm asking. Say that if we're working within, then we don't need this principle. That's just obvious. We're working within. We're not changing anything.
Are you taking into account?
Right. The whole idea of having a principle is when you're trying to go out.
No, you could have a Muslim, you could have the principle, and within the system, you could also have
This,
Muslim
just to be clear, this ikr was written contra Islam and Christianity, more or less, or some. I don't know if there were some other groups that were said that the Torah was only for one time, or it's changed. God changed it,
right.
And it's very bad principle if so. It doesn't help us much. And I'm not the one who said this. Rabbi Albo already said it, not exactly in these words, but he said that it doesn't make sense. Anyways,
Are you taking?
I'm not getting into this. I'm just saying a very basic thing. Yeah, that's my teretz for. The point is, I don't know where I got into this. The point is that I was explaining why I say that understanding prophecy is the most dangerous thing in Yiddishkeit. I don't know anyone that really wants to understand it. Maybe, again, it's easy to be secular, but then you don't want to understand prophecy either. It gets it. That's why it's the biggest secret. And getting back, and according to the Rambam, prophecy has to do with the soul. Very important understanding, but not giving a shit on Nevi'ah now. But according to Rambam, prophecy is just perfection of the human soul. It's not a story about God, it's a story about people. Which, of course, at the end touch God. But it's a story about God, people gaining knowledge of God. It's not a story about God sending messages to people, right? Which is why, at least according to the Rambam, everything has to do with the soul. You could have a theory of prophecy that's not like this. And of course, now that's the second part. And of course,
doesn't Hashalef have something like this?
He wants to be a prophet. Yeah, yes, he says the Rambam was a prophet also.
Right. I'm saying,
yeah.
What's it called? Ruach HaKodesh B'mei.
He has an article on the Rambam being a prophet. Yeah, he proves. He has good textual proofs, or at least relatively good textual proofs. The Rambam, and in any case, but the Rambam didn't present, and it's a secret. If it's a secret, Rambam didn't say this in any ever open. Right. Unlike Joseph Smith, right? They were doing the Rambam's business was being a roof, like a posik. His business wasn't being a prophet. Maybe he secretly thought that it's Alt Kanzan.
Doesn't the Rambam guard against this whole thing also because I think he doesn't really think you should believe in Nevi'im?
Of course not, but you have to believe real Nevi'im. Whatever Nevi'ah is, you should believe. The only problem is the Rambam thinks that most prophets are false prophets, including the ones in the Bible. That's why they only say you should believe much. Okay, I'm not getting into this. That's it. I just said stupid things. Wait, I have to finish my sheet. And the third thing is definitely nefesh. Again, in the Rambam's understanding, you could have a different understanding. I get the sheet already here, which is, but if you have a causal understanding of schar v'onish, any causal understanding of schar, actually not only, any understanding of schar v'onish, as long as it's not only in this world, for whatever value of this world, meaning not going to get rich, and everyone knows already for a long time that not all the people that do the Torah get rich. Some of them do, so I don't know, but not all of them. At least besides for that guy that Chava Knesset that said that he's going to run the state by the Torah because it says Vayem Shemaya. Gerecht is it. But besides for him, nobody takes that seriously for whatever reason. I think he's right, but besides for him, everyone assumes that we need a soul for he doesn't need a soul. He's the only guy that doesn't need a soul for his Torah. He just needs a state. In general, Zionism is a materialistic theory. But everyone else who's not a Zionist or like a certain kind of Kahana Zionist does think that you need a soul. and therefore, whatever the kind of thing the soul is going to be very relevant, right? And as I explained even more, for the Rambam, it's entirely relevant because for him, the perfection of the soul is what causes this schar. In other words, being part of the sechel hapa'el is Olam Haba. Same thing. Now, I have to tell you why the first part is also very, very related to this, and that's how I realized this more, which is that the Rambam's whole big thing with God being not being a body or having a body is really also saying God is not a soul or a human soul. It might be like this, like the active intellect. That's a different discussion, but it's definitely not like a human soul. And if you read the whole first chalik of Moreh Nevuchim, it explicitly says this, is really trying to deny God being the kind of thing that has a human soul. In other words, this is negative, a negative result, but you only understand what he's even saying if you understand the theory of the soul. And if you don't understand, then a lot of things he says makes no sense. Even if you do understand, they might. But if you don't even understand what he's trying to say, the Rambam's whole thing. Well, the thing, in other words, God not having a body, most people understand because we think we know what a body is. We don't, but not what the Rambam thinks a body is. But we think we know. So we sort of say, okay, he's not a piece of wood, and not a piece of how do you call it? Not a piece of meat and whatever bones and things, whatever people are made out of. But that's not really the Rambam knows that nobody really believes this. So he's mainly saying the God is not a person. In other words, not a human soul or any kind of soul. And now, which is really what leads him to say he doesn't have feelings and doesn't have all these things, which are affections. And it explicitly says in one of the Perukim when he talks about Ta'arim, says explicitly, I don't have to explain you why it doesn't make sense that God has no affections because you already read on the soul. It doesn't say those words, but you know what the soul is, and you know that all affections are being moved by something else, and that obviously doesn't happen to God, as the proofs for God show. So it's all based on this, and he even doesn't explain this; he just assumes that you understand the science of the soul. So that's why it's important for that also. What did I want to get with all of this? Now, all of this means so that's very important. But the Rambam, as we see many times in Moreh Nevuchim, definitely in Yad HaChazuk a little less. It's very interesting. So this is interesting. So now I'm thinking of it this way. The Rambam never explained what he thinks this story that I have, this is a very straight story that you can tell according to, when you could read it now, some of Alfa Rabbi's books. Very straight story of what life is all about and what the universe is all about and what God is all about. And it sort of has the soul as its like central premise. And it says humans are potentially active intellect and should get to there, and then we'll have prophecy and live forever. That's the whole story. And Rambam never says this story in that many words and in that order. Never. In other words, never does. You could see him like in Shemona Prakim start the story. He starts the lower parts of the soul and then stops. He does get to prophecy over there, but not in a very clear way, and sort of mostly focuses on the ethical implications of it. You could see him talking about Olam Haba and Shulchas Shiva most famously, but never. He does say this refers to the soul that I explained in that Torah. Most importantly, it's missing in the Moreh Nevuchim. And Moreh Nevuchim has groups of chapters for all major problems in Judaism, in religion, maybe more generally even. Right? He talks about God, talks about creation, he talks about prophecy, he talks about mitzvahs, talks about Hashgacha, talks about basically about all of that. That's everything you have to talk about, right? And he missed one big thing, which is the soul. Well, the reward of the soul, or anything like that. What happens with what a soul is. And in other words, if it would be such chapters, they would have to start with this kind of discussion of what a soul is, and Aristotle said this, and this guy said that, and we think this, and therefore follows this and that. And there's no such chapter. Very weirdly. It's a very weird omission. There should have been such a chapter. Not a chapter, there should have been like such a part.
Maybe there was no Navach for that.
They're definitely, what's your name? I know your name, Reb Eli. And it says maybe nobody ever had this question. Now, this is the worst.
That he's writing to.
The problem is that this is the worst thing you could say. It's the most obviously false thing. Not the worst. It's just the most obviously false thing. Because not only was there such a Navach, this is the thing that people notice that is wrong with the Rambam. In other words, and where they notice it from Yad HaChazuk, not from any other book. Very interestingly. The Rambam, there were at least 3 or maybe 2 or 3 or 4, depending on how you count, big like outbreaks of Machlokes and the Rambam, all of them were about this. They were known as machlokes about Chias HaMaaseh, about Elam Haba, but it all boils down to what kind of eternity, what kind of afterlife a human soul has. That's all what they all boil down to, right?
Doesn't he say in Abbas? I don't remember.
He says a lot of things.
In Gimelikum he says something.
Yeah, he says a big arichas about this, but he never gives the whole story, what I just told, the philosophical story that you should give. He gives you a story of what the ultimate Tanakh is. That's what mostly big arichas that he has in over there. So, this is a big kasha.
The subjects of his book.
Yeah, now the subject, so if you want to know about that, so I have a proof for that also. Okay, so now, we can do but first, of course, it's not really this. Manavichem is not a personal letter to that guy. I mean, it presents itself as that in the beginning, but it's.
He expects you to know a certain amount of knowledge.
Yes, but it's not. And if you have a certain amount, so again, this is like the thing. Again, every Jewish Aristotelian sort of understood this is the place where we have to work on. I mean, we could. The problem is they all more or less accepted Aristotle full all of the way, and the Rambam also seems to have accepted it all the way, although he plays all kind of. He doesn't even play games. So this is interesting. So there's one. Let's just say like there's one question why there's no Pirkei HaNefesh and Manavich. I would have wanted to be such a There's a Perek like that in the Minas V'Dayas, which is a book that the Rambam read and sort of organized a lot of the main sugyos. It's not like there weren't, and not only in Minas V'Dayas, in basically many other of that period, the Kuzri has a part about the soul. This is like known to be. It's not like the Rambam didn't hear of this being like a major thing. It was a major thing. So yes, of course, he expects you to know expects you to know. Maybe it happens to be that this guy read on the soul. Nah, it is true. So this is true. So one part of the answer would be this, and this is a very big part of changes everything you know about the Rambam, or think about him, because it's very important to realize that anything that was considered basic physics and metaphysics, the Rambam never explained. He says this many times. And the Manavich never explained. He did explain the Niyad HaChazak. This is interesting. He says explicitly in like 5 different places in different contexts that this book is not a philosophy book, right? About the guide, not a philosophy book. The reason, there's different reasons why he says this in different contexts. He firstly says it because he doesn't think that his job is to teach philosophy. He thinks that anyone that didn't read philosophy, whatever, doesn't have problems, so he shouldn't read his book, or no use of reading his book. Like that's besides for the first part, he doesn't want everyone to read, so it's a little complicated, or at least to know the ideas in it. But everything other than that, he doesn't think that anyone that didn't read this like doesn't like them. This book is for people that read Torah plus philosophy. Secondly, he doesn't feel that he has anything very interesting to add to philosophy. He says this openly. Says whatever. He has opinions, but he says whatever. They're not very much better than anyone else's. If you personally care, I can tell you my opinion, but it's just copy paste more or less from somewhere. Even if he does have his opinion, it's not very important to him. He doesn't see himself as a big posek achra in philosophy. He might not see himself as a big posek achra in Torah either, but that's a different discussion. But he definitely doesn't see that as his job in philosophy. Like there's better philosophers than me or whatever. And thirdly, he says this because, I'm just making a sort of list, he says this because he wants you to know, this says in Chazayim, that anytime he does quote philosophy, there's a secret reason why he does it. He doesn't do it just because he wants to introduce you to this concept. It's because he thinks that this is like a code for solving something in the Torah. In other words, for example, is what you mentioned, if he has this whole thing giving the history of why people thought there's one sphere and 5 and 7, what he's really doing is telling you that if he'll find some Amar Chazal, instead this is more explicit, or some psukim that have 1 sphere or 2 or 5 or 7 or whatever number you'll find, you'll know that this is really because that's what they thought, as you know from this history. But everything else also, and the first Perek has a whole chapter of the 3 main principles of physics, and Perek Zayin, and also has it's basically a hesber on the story of Gan Eden. It's not about telling you physics, maybe other things. So that's another reason. But more important, so that's one reason. Now, interesting. So in other words, what this means for our purposes is that the Rambam understood this story of the soul to be just basic knowledge. Everyone knows it. And why would I have to tell it to you? This book is not for people that don't know that the human soul is the form of the body, and etc., etc.
Novach means in a very specific way. Let's say, for example, the first part that you have Sukkim Torah sounds like Hashem as a body. That's
let's say. Now, second thing, which is true, this is proof text for this, is that Rambam also doesn't think he solved the problem of the soul, philosophical problem. Okay, he says this explicitly in Perek Ayin something where he argues with some kalam proof for the creation of the world, and the proof was from the eternity of the soul. And he says, "You're tulitanya bidlaitanya, you're arvach arvet tzurich. You're bringing a proof from something that nobody knows to another thing that we like. It doesn't work. This is a harder sugya, basically. Nobody really knows." And he even explains what the question would be, and seems to be meramas that he's with the Ibn Rushd's position that there's really only one soul that stays, or at least sees that as a real option over there, because he uses it to slug up the guy's raya. Because the raya was that if this world was eternal, there would have been an infinite amount of souls, and there can't be an infinite amount of anything. So, therefore, the world is not eternal. That was might be ever said as raya or someone. And the Rambam says, firstly,
Rabbi Kreskas is not happy with this, right?
nobody. I don't know. And the Rambam says on this. This is in the end of Chelik Aleph. He says this raya is nice raya if you would have already a proof that is eternal souls, but that's not, at least not more proven than our proof has to be something everyone agrees or knows easier than to the next thing, and that's backwards. And number two, I have an answer for you according to Aristotle, and he says, as the Mefarshim explained, that there's only one soul, because individuation only happens with matter, and things that don't have matter are only one. So there's only one soul. This whole soul could be eternal, basically. So does he really think that this is true? This was some people had famously this position that there's no individual. How do you call it? No individual soul survive. Only the soul survives. Does he think this? I don't know. He definitely thinks that there's another place where he says explicitly. I remember if there's another place. This is at least one place where he says explicitly that this is a hard thing. He doesn't have the answer to this question. So that might be a reason. The problem is that this is all not the. This is not the, like you're saying. This is not the question. This is not the navach that he's worried about. And what he's worried about is that this is disagreeing with the Torah. And the Torah says, well, firstly it says schar b'olam hazeh. Okay, but secondly, at least Chazal say individual schar b'olam haba, and this doesn't work with that. And they say tchias ha'ma'asim, which is another thing that doesn't work with that. In other words, they think schar for a guf and a nefesh together. That's pshat tchias ha'ma'asim. I'm pretty sure that Rambam knew that. He wasn't so confused about what it says in the text. Maybe he was, but I mean, he read Sadia. Sadia says this, so he knew that this was the traditional position. And he never answers this question, right? And now, of course, he didn't know that this is not a mevucha because from the first day that he published his book, people read Yad HaChazaka. Now, Yad HaChazaka, there is a basic account of the soul, because Yad HaChazaka is the one place where the Rambam does do philosophy. Very weirdly, right? The opposite in a certain sense. Very weirdly, the only place he thinks he does have to give you basic philosophy is in Yad HaChazaka, because it's not written for philosophers. Therefore, the first 4 chapters are, calls it klulim, right? The klulim of all Aristotelian philosophy, physics, and metaphysics, because he thinks that's part of the Torah. For whatever reason, why he exactly does it, I don't know, because he knows that nobody's going to understand it. But he does that, so that's the place where he explains what the soul is, the only place where he explicitly gives the Aristotelian definition of the form of the body. And also their definition of which part survives death. The only place where he explicitly does this. And then, of course, Nachas Tshuva, where he explicitly said that Olam Haba is not a thing. He almost explicitly says that Olam Haba is just the soul's perfection and forever, and he doesn't say the word Sechel HaPoel, and in the whole, he said that in the whole Sefer Hayad, but he does say that Olam Haba is not a world that will be, it's the world that exists already, it's just the intellectual world, intellectual devekas, connection, and so on. And many people noticed this and said, you don't mention Tchias HaMa'asim, which is the story that our mothers told us and Sadia Goin told us. And in one of the people that were involved in this fight was the guy that Rambam wrote Timon Nevichim too, and he actually wrote a whole defense of the Rambam, and his defense is more or less on the same lines as the Rambam's defense. Well, he argues a lot of things, but basically says no, the Rambam does believe in Tchias HaMa'asim.
The words.
And the resurrection of the dead. The thing is that everyone agrees to this, and I already said this a few times. Everyone agrees that at least the Rambam explicitly, and why? Because it says in Chas Tshuva, in Perek Gimel, that Omer Tchias HaMa'asim Natari, he quotes that, and it says in Didgol Mikra. But what it doesn't say, and this is really still a huge machlokes, and everyone agrees that this is, even the most right-wing pshat of the Rambam agrees that the Rambam thinks that Tchias HaMa'asim is a waste of time. That's not what the schar is. It's a schar, like for tzaddikim, whatever, why not, for random reasons, like whatever, it's a shame that they should be dead by Mashiach or something like that. Very, very small reasons. But the ultimate schar is explicitly not Tchias HaMa'asim. And this is the loike everyone else before him. The Loika the Pshat, the Loika tradition. And he never even feels worried to explain this. Again, when he's asked about it, he says, what do you mean? Of course, the Tchias Meisim, God could do miracles, gives you a whole drush about miracles, which is totally irrelevant to the question. And says, and also, like the things he does do is like slug up the eyes that they had for Tchias Meisim. Like all these psukim added, silly drushes.
The Gemara does that, no?
No, not in the way the Rambam does it, okay?
Yeah.
The Rambam, it's very weird to write a book supposedly defending Tchias Meisim, which says once that there's Tchias Meisim in the whole book, and he says, I only have to say it once, because why do I have to say it twice? Like, what's the point? And most of your proofs are stupid. And also, it's not the goal, it doesn't explicitly say that. And also, I'm not interested in this so much. And also, you should be interested in miracles. A whole bunch of random side notes, and never answers the question. Like, how did you reconcile this, that you changed Judaism? But one of the basic things of it. He never reconciles, never answers the question. And he just doesn't. I don't have an answer. I mean, and even some people, Ibn Tibbon's kind of people, all said that Rambam doesn't really believe that Tchias Meisim will happen. He thinks that it's a mushal. And that's what the people told the Rambam that he thinks. And he said, Chas v'sholom, I don't think that. Because God could do miracles. He never said, I don't think that because it's important. Obviously, he could. And that's what I mean when it says in the Ikrim that God could do Tchias Meisim. It means it could be. Basically, because God do miracles, why couldn't he do Tchias Meisim? He might do it because it says that one pasuk in Daniel that really says it. And does that pasuk say it? Maybe it does. I don't know. Does the Rambam so afraid of psukim? No. So what's the difference if one pasuk says it? So in any case, he never answers this question. Yeah, that has to do with it. I know, has to do something with the discussion. Well, it's also the Gemara that says he wasn't a real Navi, so it's the other people that have to make him into a real Navi for these purposes. In any case, this is another reason, and I don't know the answer to this question. He never answers this question, but definitely seems to assume that there's a Tilian or Afarabi. This pshat of the soul is the truth, and he doesn't know exactly how to explain it. So maybe he doesn't know the answer, so he doesn't know exactly. Maybe there's individual. In that case, he doesn't have an ultimate decision about these things. Maybe he thinks it's a waste of time to speculate or not important enough. I don't know. But definitely does realize that this is a big question, and definitely never answers the real. I mean, I can understand why, but definitely never really got into this discussion, like this big discussion that is about the Rambam. The Rambam himself ignored it. He tried to get himself out of it. He basically, and the thing that some people say seems somewhat reasonable, but again, this is politics. But seems somewhat reasonable is. Even so, this lady says, well, the Rambam read this guy's book, and he said, wait, even my student who I'm supposedly writing Moreh Nevuchim to, and it was written like that week, or like the same that year, didn't understand me, because he's busy defending me that I do believe in Tchias Meisim, but that's not the point. So it was very sad. I don't know. There's some in Moreh Nevuchim, there's already like a Muslim that he's not really happy with this Talmud. He's trying to teach him, and it didn't work. So, in the letter in the beginning, it says this. So it's not always clear. We can't use him as the guide for the true pshat of the guide, because he might not have understood it. Even Tibbon's, at least the pshat seems to have understood better. And the Rambam never wanted to speak to him either. So go with Guy Fashtain. Point is, the Rambam didn't think that he has to answer this guy, because this guy is asking a stupid question, so you don't deserve the answer, as he really believed. It makes sense. Someone comes and screams at the Rambam, what do you mean? You're being Maharas? That's Chas v'Sholem, that's Bit Tchias Meisim, no problem, whatever you want. And the Geras Tchias Meisim is all about saying this, like, I don't really care. I only really, he says this over there, I only really care that people shouldn't believe that God is a body. This he would fight about. In other words, the second fight about the Rambam, there he would have involved himself stronger. Because when people, Reb Shlomo and Har was going around saying that the Rambam was not Bekoros for saying God doesn't have a body, the Rambam would have answered and said, yes, I say that. But when people go around saying anything else, the Rambam says, I don't care, say whatever you want. That's not important to me. There, you know what, you need me to write a letter, it says, God, there will be Tchias Meisim, I'll write that letter. You're not worthy of the discussion because you don't understand the question. Like if they would ask him a question, look, we understand the soul is kach v'kach, and how do you reconcile this? Then he might have give us the answer that we're looking for. But since they asked him, you got Bekoros, so no, chas v'sholom shkan Bekoros. What is he supposed to answer? But there's no, and I always wonder about whatever. This is a different politic. Like all these like people that are busy saying that Rambam chas v'sholom. What do you think the Rambam should have done if he wasn't was this chas v'sholom? Like, is it possible? Like, what is this based on? This okay, but this is shtism. What is this based on? This like the Heilige Rambam must have never said, and they said for some things that are obviously wrong, right? Well, let's say even this discussion, right? I mean, many people read Rambam and said this guy doesn't believe in Tchias Meisim. I don't think those people are crazy. The Rambam himself doesn't think they were crazy. He thinks they were stupid because they didn't accept that that's not the point, the question. But he doesn't think that they were entirely wrong. He says, "No, Chas v'shalom, I do okay," and I wrote it once. But the whole Tchis Meisim says in the entire Mishnah Torah in 6 words. Like, come on, that's not believing in Tchis Meisim, right? I mean, again, that technically is, but doesn't help us much. The guy has a good shala. And then people will say, well, how could you say that? And the Rambam has like a Muslim in the Nevichim that it's a mashal. There's like a parak that there's Mefarshim said that says, and then Rabbi comes, Chas v'shalom, it didn't mean. And this is nice. I understand the rights lakam, but what I don't understand is where this certainty comes from. Imagine there was a guy who learned Kol Torah Kila, and his name was not Moshe Maimon, Moshe Ben Yankel Pfefferkorn. Who cares what his name was? And then he read Aristotle and he was convinced. And the Rambam tells us the story of this kind of guy, right? And then he said, well, how can we explain the Torah? No, Tchis Meisim was a mashal for the push hidden. Really, it's Hasheras HaNefesh, the soul existing forever. Is it impossible that such a person should have existed? Why are you so, what are you so worried about? I don't know. I mean, I do know, but just saying that it's not an argument.
Well, maybe they don't know his point, so they think Tchis Meisim is that important. That goes back to the same issue.
Oh, they don't have that it's not important.
Say that because they think it's that important. He's like, no.
But let's say it is important. Again, I can give you a better question. Okay, there's a radical theory. Maybe there's a theory. Maybe
for the other books, right? If I want to mention,
but I could talk you. Wait, I could give you the same kasha on crazier things, right? Let's say there's a theory, and there's not really such a theory. But let's say Leo Strauss and Pinnas tried to make such a theory, almost that the Rambam wasn't even sure that there's a God. They have a good tanis because if you figure out the right, comes out. The point is, that's probably not true. But also because I'm the same sheikhet. But maybe it is true. Because the Rambam understands that there's the proof to be for God is Arkivet Rarach, the Rambam's proof. So it's very not clear where he actually ends up with a proof for God existing. I mean, Kreska says also there's no proof for God existing. So whatever. And also a lot of Chassidish. So man, wouldn't be such a crazy. Wouldn't be the first one to say that. But in any case, let's say that's true, that he was a secret atheist. Okay, agnostic, not atheist. He was not that stupid. But, okay, and then say Chas v'shalom, Ram was not an atheist. Well, imagine there was a guy, again, same story, that had this, if it's not a good kasha, then Stamel, she can get the kasha, so who cares? But let's say there is a good kasha, what do you expect the guy to do? I don't know what you expect him to do.
Well, maybe not be so intensely on the team of the people who believe in God. That's what
so he should have went to the Tana is okay. Tana is he was very relaxed. He was very relaxed. How do you know he wasn't relaxed? Why not? He should resign his job. He got a job, good job.
Above his job, he could have just done the minimum state. He just didn't.
Wait, I have an answer for you. He thought that he's helping humans. He was not an atheist, but he was a moral atheist. He thought that it's a good thing to help people.
And this helps people.
He thought that it helps people. Obviously, no, that you can't deny. He didn't think that it's hurting people, right? He thought that he's helping people.
To me, it's their point.
This guy has a shal halacha. He wants to help him. Write a book of halacha to help him.
Altruism. That's not altruist.
It's tamazai.
Even more.
But it's tamazai true. It's by the way. I'm going to say it, it's important. This is tamazai true. The Rambam didn't write the Yad HaChazaka because he was so fired for the shit Rambam. He wrote it because he wanted to help people. It's 100% altruism.
You still need a little bit something else.
No, I don't think. I actually think this is generally the position. I think that's generally wrong. The Rambam, unlike some other people, didn't write anything, including this things that he did do with a very big fire. It was all out of altruism. Nothing. At least his ideal was like that. There's nothing. Nobody writes books. We have this idea of like a tzaddik or a good writing book because it's so important that everyone should know. And therefore, you're helping someone or not. And the Rambam, 100%, he writes this explicitly, that he wrote his book to help Judaism and Jews in general. But he didn't write it because but the program is only there, it's only there to help. Well, in what sense help? Well, of course, there's smaller senses of help, like just the guy shouldn't have to ask should be able to look in the Rambam, and there's broader sense of help. But it's totally out of altruism. It's not out of the truth, because the Rambam didn't care, honestly. If someone would come and say, I wrote the same book, just all the halachas have the opposite halacha. Never the shit Rambam. It's always shit the stories. I think the Rambam would be very happy. He wouldn't write his book. That's enough kamina l'maisa.
I don't know why.
I honestly believe that because he didn't care. You have to realize. You have to see that when the Rambam gets asked questions in halacha, he also doesn't really care about that. He's like, oh, I'm wrong. You know what? Chachmei Loynel, you're so worried. It's like, okay, change it. He doesn't care.
So that matters.
Because it doesn't matter what exactly what matters is that everyone should have a book where they could look up the halacha.
But he hears that there
And
should
for
be
political
a halacha.
reasons, yes, also. Because that's a good thing for humans. He thinks that it's good for Muslims to have an halacha, and it's good for Christians to have an halacha, it's good for Jews. And he says explicitly the Jews were the only one left without a halacha, so he made them one, right? Without a law book, not halacha. Without a book of laws. That's what it says in the Gersh Chesam Esem. And not in in his letter to his Talmud.
Like Kutchin, though. The Karbanis, all those stuff.
Of course.
I got me saying,
No. Oh, you really don't want to know why I wrote that?
Well,
And tyrants.
What? So nobody should ever bring karbonis again.
why would you mean that? The Karbanis?
And the Gemara, you can still bring karbonis. When the Rambam, you can't.
Why give me Karbanis?
Stop.
No, it's why give me Karbanis? Because according to Rambam's Inyad.
See, there's too many requirements.
There's too many requirements. He has more requirements than the Gemara?
No, he makes them into halacha. The Gemara doesn't have halacha set for anything. The Gemara is not halacha set. The Gemara is just discussions. You might as well add another. Now that there's Rambam, you can't do that. The Rambam Magipaskan. It's very different. This is just Pinim. This is not the true answer, but it's a point that you should think about. As long as there was only Gemara and Kachim, any guy, let's say tomorrow, Mr. What's his name, built the Beis Hamikdash, is a baya. We don't have tcheles, something. We'll get together through the council of the Rabbanut Arashit, and we could be Tanoim, basically, right? We could look in the Pusik and dashn it. No reason not to be Tanoim, right? The only reason the Rambam understands, right? The whole reason we're not Tanoim for Ilchas Tefillin is because we've sort of accepted the authority of the Bezdin that was afterwards and pretend that the Talmud was a Bezdin, whatever, and do it. But for Kachim, we don't have such a Bezdin, right? It's not Negel, it's just theoretical, right?
There's never any psak on Kutchin, man.
Right. The Rambam was the only, first and last one to make psak for Kachim.
So if that's true, the Rambam...
Him and the Chavetz Chaim. And the Chaim Kanievsky. No, he only started. Baruch Hashem, he didn't finish.
I never thought. It's a good point. I never thought.
I don't think this is why he did it. It's Tammuz a good point.
No, yeah,
Nothing to do.
it's the thing. But the problem is the Rambam Malay would hold that there's no reason to accept what the Rambam wrote either. Saying,
Of course there's a reason.
why do you accept the Rambam's reason? Why?
Oh, he wanted.
The Rambam. There's no reason to accept the Rambam.
So the Rambam's game is that his saying the game. The other answer is that the Rambam in general, this is true and for the whole Rambam, the Rambam wanted to replace the Talmud, and he can't replace it with skipping Kachim and Taharis. No, it's not serious. He really thinks that those are also important laws, and you should learn them from the Rambam.
Okay, but that's a different
We're
story.
getting further into this altruism. We're gonna like.
Of course it's altruism. I don't think altruism is the push the pshat according to me. You don't need. That's not a conspiracy theory. These things are conspiracy
There's
theory.
certain levels of disconnect that
No.
at some point
What do you
breaks
mean?
down like how far
People are never reading Masechtas Zvachim and they don't understand their word. So he's gonna explain it to them. Well, that's Spanish Mishnayos does this, for example. No, that was my Spirim time. That's not serious.
I'm saying in general, the Rambam was written right as it says. That before the Talmud, like the Talmud comes after
I think
the
it's.
Rambam.
I don't know. To me, I still find
What
it a
do you
little
mean?
bit difficult to.
Because what I'm saying is that
There's
it's
no dissonance.
definitely altruism. I don't see where dissonance is. You have to understand that he doesn't believe that the halachas are true anyways. That he explicitly doesn't believe that they're true.
Right, definitely.
What does that mean? That there is halacha? Or that's
They're just laws, just like anyone else has laws. Not very different. Well, they're better. They're the best laws. Okay, the best laws, but still not true laws. No such thing as true laws. The only true law is the neichav halacha.
What do you know? I'm not sure what you mean by that.
In the Maskala sense, whatever. That's another English. He knows.
The point is there should be a consensus. Whereas that's why.
Okay. Also, maybe the Rambam was planning to build this Mikdash and needs a consensus for what the halacha should be. I don't know.
His problem is with Tosfos. If you come with Tosfos, is not. He doesn't have a problem if everyone does it. His problem is if half the people do it, but half that's
One of the problems. Yeah.
He doesn't have a problem if everyone does it. He's like, yeah, fine, I'm the one. I'll do.
Exactly. That's why I say it's altruistic. If someone would have written the Ram before him, he would not have done it, or after him, or at the same time. Even if you would think that he's right in some details. And I really think that when people came and asked him, the Rambam is wrong. You know what? I'm wrong. Change it. He doesn't care. I don't know. This is my reading his feelings of those letters and shivas. But he doesn't fight for his opinion. His son fights for his father's opinions. He explicitly criticizes his son for doing this. And one of the letters about the machloikas, not in halacha, but in one of the letters about the machloikas, explicitly says, "My son is, of course, he's a good son. He's the name is for his father, but that's not what you should do." Calm down. He writes to his son or to his student. There's letters to this Yosef guy. And he says something like this: "Yeah, Haben is a good son, but come on." And someone else I remember criticized the son for he was fighting with the Danila Bavdi also earlier, that criticized the Rambam Halacha, and he's always like, "Why are you interested in winning these arguments? Let him be a better Tosfos guy." They call it Talmud rhetoric, right? Rhetorical dialectical discussions, right? So he's better at that than you. Who cares? Waste of time. I mean, it's not a waste of time, but it's like someone I remember does this. And that's not the Rambam because it was written after the Rambam. But the Rambam never the Rambam could have been Bavram and the Rambam and write all these shivas to prove that his shitta is right. And even when he gets asked, he answers in 3 lines and says, he can tell you his wise position, where he got it from and whatever, but he never fights too much. It's true, right?
No,
You understand what I'm
That's
saying?
not our argument.
Okay.
I'm trying to say that includes.
Maybe I made this up.
It's just, I think we're all having the same issue.
The kid is something else. I'm saying something else. So the point, I don't know, I'm going to stop here because I'm going to get more things. The point is that I think that this is not understanding how people at that level really work. Both in the not understanding altruism and in not understanding what the options are really. Like if you don't, and this is again, you could take whichever level you want. If you don't understand the real problem, the questions the things that are simply true to him, right? Then of course you're not going to understand how far he's willing to follow the truth. Because you think the whole discussion is like a discussion of authority. The Heilige Rambam said, the Rambam himself will tell you, the Heilige Rambam didn't say, Platz. But if it's the real discussion of philosophy, then like the Rambam is a real philosopher. It's like, it doesn't matter if the whole world says I'm wrong, it's still true, right? It doesn't change how many people and how many authorities and everything, right? And some things he really thought that he knew in that sense. And he wasn't playing games, he wasn't going on the authority of Aristotle, he thought that it's proven to him, not proven. He even does this whole machlokes, but Kadmas is not proven, so therefore I don't have to accept it. But he can't. That's the only way out he found, right? Of course, it's not clear how much, to what extent, whatever he means with that. But that's really how he thinks. And what would he do if he thinks that the halacha is not the most important thing? It would still, maybe whatever you could say that's why he made Mishnah Torah. But you definitely don't have a problem. Like what do you expect him to do? You know what? Let's say he figured it out after. First he wrote Mishnah Torah, and then he became a philosopher. It's not really historically accurate, but let's say that was true. It might be somewhat accurate, right? People change, people that continue to learn change their minds when they're 45. Right? He might have known the basics, but what if that happened? What if he changed his mind between Mishnah Torah and Moreh Nevuchah? There might be some things that he did change his mind in certain directions. He didn't. He stopped fighting. Actually, he stopped fighting the Quran at some point. Right? He actually stopped. Maybe for practical reasons, I don't know if it's a philosophical change, but he did stop. Actually, there's like a he stopped. That's
not right, because Quran not going to make sense.
And also, he thinks that Quran, he might think that they're he might think that they're destructive.
I think that's right. I hear.
He fought Quran less than everyone else. You have to remember. This is also have to remember relative to every other person living in those 500 years. The Rambam is the least proiges on Karoim.
He agreed with them on some.
Whatever.
More things than
he's the least proiges on Karoim in some sense. Even in political sense, he's not as proiges as others. He's machsher der Chchit. He tries to, and this is version. Yeah, even the machsher Chchit.
No, you definitely say, and I say this. You definitely could.
I'm just saying the theoretical. I'm not saying what happened. I'm just saying that the principled problem that people have doesn't seem to be correct. The people seem to be. It's impossible that someone who's such a Tamtachim like the Rambam should also be an Apikoris. It's definitely possible. It probably happened more than once. The Rambam was probably not a good example because he was trying to reconcile everything. I am sure that in the course of Jewish history, Yechon Gudel became a Tzedeki. Okay, it happens.
Everybody knew he became a Tzedeki. You're saying you.
Well, he was stupid. Why did he let them know?
You're positing a theory. That
also, I don't know if it's an interesting myth. I don't know what the pshat of that story is. Anyways, it's a nice mass. It's a nice. What the mass? How could it be? Everyone knew. So that's stupid. Why did he tell everyone? It makes a lot more sense not to tell everyone.
If there's a person.
Just for survival, even.
I'm saying you're positing a theory that's like secretly was a thing.
Well, that's a different problem. Then you have a question on your Messiah, but that's a different question. Not talking about that question. Then you have maybe a raya from the Messiah. That's a different child. If that's a raya, maybe it's a raya. Does the Messiah care about this even? I don't know who this Messiah is. Anyways, that's a different discussion. Point is, it's like a question. But in the more general, like, could there be any snipers that have been a Shabtoi? Why couldn't he have been? He was a great. I'm not saying what the truth was. I don't know about truth. I don't know. He played the same exact game as the Rambam. You want me to sign the Shabbat if he's not Mashiach? I'll sign it. What difference does it make if what I sign or not? What I personally believe, this is your business. You're not asking me that question, right? You just want to fight with me politically. I could do politics just as good as you. He could, right? He even won the political fight. Now, what he personally believed, I don't know. I don't personally know. But the point is, it's not impossible. I mean, obviously,
But he didn't.
there were other people that were smart that believed in the things that he believed in.
Would be is he made an actual
He did.
movement connected shop soy. Like a whole.
He sort of did.
Instead of just doing the things he was for.
He sort of did. I mean, one of the tenets of Shabsais is not to care about halacha, and he wrote these amazing, huge works about halacha. It's not clear if Ibn Snatch believed that part, even the Shabsai Yalchans. But let's
By
say,
the way, they're also subversive in some.
of course, they are subversive.
Oh, they are. Oh, I don't know.
Subversive? I don't know. Ibn Snatch just doesn't leave anything straight. Like, he's the biggest mefalpol ever. I don't know if that's subversive or not. It's regular Judaism, but like, you never know. He has interesting Torahs, amazing Torahs, but it's not a kasha. The kasha doesn't begin. The theoret. What I'm saying is that the Yisod is the kasha doesn't begin. If it happened to be that he wasn't, I don't see what the kasha. It's definitely possible to have happened that happened to someone. I don't see why it can't happen. I'm sure that it happened. In other words, I'm sure that it happened.
But like you said, he actually seems someone who wouldn't be that person.
Who?
The Rambam seems
I don't know
likely
how
to
he
be that
sees.
person.
No, I'm not sure. Depending on what his theory about these things was, man, that's the question, right? Could the Pope be an atheist? It could be. I don't know. What do I know? It's a good job to be the Pope. I mean,
That's not convinced he was
But
by
you're gonna have-
Aristotle's proofs,
You're
right?
gonna have choices between popes, and one's gonna be more likely to be that than the other one, right? Like that's
I don't
like,
know. I'm sure there were some
those are
atheist
most
popes in
likely.
history. Pretty sure.
I'm saying, but there's gonna be ones that are more or less likely to be that. Like if you.
We don't wanna lose
one
Rambam,
sees-
though.
No, we usually
Someone
have this.
else.
We usually have this thing. I should stop talking about this. We usually have this thing where it must have been like, it's like a nochel. How do you say? It would be like a very evil person if that would be true, right? It'd be not a swindler. There's a worse word for that. But the question is if he's doing it in good faith. Maybe he really believes that that's a good thing to do. It's not clear. Understand? But this is already controversial. But
Yeah.
he'd be like a fraud. So therefore he should have resigned. I don't know. Maybe he should have. What should the Pope do if he realizes that God doesn't exist?
He's just gonna.
I have a hard time
he's not
understanding
gonna
it
be the most
as a
intense
person that's
Pope.
maybe a little self-absorbed. If I would be Rambam and I would be writing a book altruistically,
I don't know if the drama was the most intense Jew.
I would
It's
fudge.
in a certain
You
sense.
notice a lack of effort towards the end of the book.
Depends how far we're going. What percentage? What percentage are we giving this? Like, if we're giving it.
By the way, this is all not true.
Well,
This Rai is mamish not a Rai. This intensity. Some people just like to be intense. Nothing to do with belief.
I'm not saying. Yeah, I'm not. I'm not.
There's
trying
some
to-
guy somewhere that cataloged every time it says something in Star Wars. Okay, does he believe that Star Wars is David Hashemayim? No. There's really such people, right? It's
Well,
called
he
the.
doesn't think
He's even as
he
far
doesn't
as
think it's
Fakir,
not
you know, that,
interesting.
like,
That's it.
he's even as far
It's
as
not
Fakir.
Gonish. It's just a thing. It's just a nature. I don't think that's really a Rai. It's not a Rai. It's some Mishigas that some people have. They need to like have everything very clear. I don't know if the Rambam was like that, but I'm just saying. Like I'm sure that. Trying to think of a good example of this. There isn't. I don't have an easy one. Anyway, that's this. And pointed back to the Nikida. What was I trying to say? It's that serious. So we don't know. The Rambam never gave us this account. This story of this. The only place he did it was in Yad HaChazak, where he does have to give basic philosophy, but he never like connects the dots entirely. He somewhat does. And that's really probably why the people that attacked him from there. They also didn't read any of the other books. But the machlokes was always about Sefer Hamada. Was like Mernavich was Agav Sefer Hamada Nechram. It's a very weird situation.
Right? They didn't have Rambam right away.
Yes, but in province they had it, and then always from the first day, and they didn't really work with it. Maybe they didn't understand it. It's just hard to understand. I don't know. They didn't understand the translation. So Mazel they didn't have kapach in those days. But anyways, but it's because of that, and he does. But the parts that he does do, we should probably focus on, which he does, and not only him, everyone like sort of. Most people nowadays are happy with those parts for some reason, and don't realize the implications of them. Maybe they're good parts, just, and then we should, like the Rambam himself would say, yeah, the philosophy, whatever. Nobody really knows. Yeah. Okay. Schön.